So after a day of work stripping out the car, removing the seats and all the interior, we've extracted the loom in one piece. The loom and then all the modules that plug into it. So yeah, this is the arteries of the car. I don't know, the nervous system. This is 100 kilos of copper because this vehicle had every accessory you can imagine. So it's totally unnecessary for what we want. So we're going to try to strip it down, save some weight, save some space because we don't have to bundle this up and store it somewhere. So it's going to be peeling back the tape and picking out what we can and what we need to keep.
Here we're looking at the original RC car's suspension. It has a fixed front axle. It has a sprung rear motor and gearbox assembly. The tracks are also unsupported. They're just stretched between the front and rear wheels, meaning that it only really puts pressure down on the front and back. And so the tracks are really just for looks. There's no meaningful traction from this section here. And this has been proven by people who have replaced the tracks, which are 35 years old now, with just wheels, with tyres, sorry. And the vehicle drives and behaves exactly the same as it does with the tracks. But we want to make it functional, not just a show pony. So we're looking at how we can spread pressure over this large area of track, how we can give it suspension, and most importantly, how we can scale it up. So here we are, 12 times larger, looking at a simple structure that gives us a compression member between the front and rear axle, because there's considerable load here, a lot of tension in this belt, especially if it's unsupported down the bottom here and you drive over something. So if you're teetering on top of a rock here, then there's a lot of tension here, which we need to support with a compression member here. We've also added some little idler rollers here to support the weight of this track. This track assembly is 500 kilos per side, just for the rubber track. So just this bit that's stretched between here and here needs to be supported. And here we've shown it. We won't use just simple coil spring setups like this, but just showing that this is where it would be suspended. It's suspension from this frame up to the main body module, which would include the passengers and the engine and gearbox. An improvement on this layout is what is seen in snowmobiles. This is called HiFax. It's a rail system that the track pushes up against, and they just put a very thin layer of polyethylene plastic along here, which is a low friction material, and its weakness is it breaks down if it gets hot, and it does wear away. So it's replaceable, and in the snow this works because the snow keeps it cool and also acts to lubricate it. They don't work as well in the shoulder season when you start running out of snow and you start running in mud and grit, and then your tracks start wearing out very quickly, both the rubber track and the replaceable bit of polyethylene. So it robs you of a lot of power. There's a lot of friction here, so a lot of your drive force is required just to overcome that friction and not to push you forwards.
We've laid out the wiring loom as it fits in the car, so the engines stay at the front and then down through the cabin area. And we're slowly plugging all the modules back in. As we removed them, we labelled what they were. So we've tagged all the lead, and we're just plugging everything back in, and we're going to then transfer that onto the engine and work out what we need to keep to make the engine happy. So we don't care if we get body warnings, but we want the ECU not to be in limp mode.
So this is roughly the original Turag layout. Underneath is the front differential as a short shaft coming from the transfer case and a longer shaft going to the rear diff. Passengers sit above tail shaft. Squeeze 5 people in. We want to take this and work out how we can fit it between our tracks. So one option is to just remove the tail shaft and rear diff and use the engine and gearbox, transfer case, front differential, and drop it in like that. Obvious issue here is the transfer case and half the gearbox extending out the back of the vehicle. So to fix this, we can shorten up the front drive shaft, tail shaft, and move the front differential right back to the transfer case. This moves, it's only a little bit sticking out here, but moves the engine a long way forwards. And this means we can either have a driver in the center because there's no tail shaft, which is pretty accurate to the original RC car. It's got a very narrow cockpit, sort of based on a fighter plane. Issues with this are the engine is still a long way forwards and it still has the transmission sticking out the back. Also, this alignment here in 2D looks really good, but this transfer unit here might not be low enough to allow us to go straight to the differential and still have it fit under the gearbox. Haven't explored that completely. Also concerned that this front differential may not be as strong as the rear differential. Don't really know. There's a chance the front differential is stronger because in the vehicle, the original application, front differential actually gets more shock loading because front wheels are more likely to lose traction, and then they skip, and that's actually when diffs fail, not under just full traction and max load. It's worse when they skip and things wind up and then get some impacts.
So this thing had every mod con, including tire pressure monitoring and all the keyless entry from all around the vehicle. Even monitors if you've left your bag with your keys inside the car, doesn't let you lock them inside, all that sort of thing. So there's just a lot of extra features that we're not going to need on an RC car. Yeah, we're going to work backwards from the front. So we're going to start at the engine bay, we're going to come inside to the fuse boxes and the power delivery control, and the dash and things like the gauges, but also the brake pedal sensors. Anything that there's a good chance it requires for safety that it might check on startup.
So this version is starting to look a lot like earth-moving equipment. This is what you see. They have a solid structure that supports the rear and front axle. They have idler rollers that push down on the track, spreading the load over a large surface area of the track. And they often have a little bit of articulation here. This allows, when you hit something with this wheel, it spreads the load, shares the load between this wheel and this wheel. One rides up and one pushes down. It basically halves your load on this suspension component here. So in this layout, the weight of all this track is unsprung. Yeah, the body, which includes the passengers and the engine, is sprung, but all this heavy track is not sprung. So this is pretty rudimentary suspension. An improvement, and is what you'll see in modern battle tanks, is individually sprung track rollers. This means when a rock or obstacle comes along, first this one rides up and over it, and then the next one, and so forth, all maintaining and sharing pressure. It means that these driven and larger cogs here don't need suspension. They just have, this is the zone of compliance. There's this movement here, gives it some ramp angle here so you can drive up and over a large obstacle, and at low speed you can drive over something even larger.
So we're slowly going through each module, just working out what it is. So, like for example, we found this stack of computers under the driver's seat, which had cabling going into the seat. It has 3 set drivers, and each one can have a different setting. But also, it's the cable sneaks off and goes to the transmission. So we just we look up the part number and work out from Volkswagen if this is which one of these is a seat controller and which one is a transmission controller, because we definitely need to keep the transmission controller.
This layout flips the engine around and runs the tail shaft to what was originally the front differential, now in the rear. This has issues where this differential would need to be flipped over to reverse the drive direction, so we don't have multiple gears in reverse and only one low speed in forwards motion. We'd need to flip that diff. This non-symmetrical diff would cause challenges there, but we could use a front diff there and then just have unequal length drive shafts. Normally try to keep your drive shafts the same length. That's important for front-wheel drive cars because you get more wind up in one axle than the other. But in this application, because it's turning or steering wheel here, then we could probably get away with unequal length shafts. So this application kind of works. It still has all the same negatives. Well, I guess this diff could possibly be weaker, but would be substituting for a different differential anyway, pulled from some other vehicle. So it may work. Has negatives of this transfer case sticking out into the passenger seating area, but sort of okay. Another option is to move all this back to solve this issue, but that just means that the engine is sticking out a lot further. So this is more where this differential is originally situated underneath the engine. So the oil pan has a shallow spot here for the differential. So in some ways this is easier, but the engine is sticking out way out the back. This would be fun for doing wheelies, I guess, but otherwise the weight's too far back, and we still need to add radiators here. So we could move the radiators to the side and just change all the plumbing, but it would be easier to use the original radiators in their original location, just moving the thermofans around to reverse the airflow.
Here's a tip for people. You need to take the seats out while you still have power. So we'd already started removing the engine, and we'd taken the battery out, taken the fuse panel out, and then we went to remove the seats because the loom ran under the seats. And you need to be able to drive the seats backwards and forwards to get to the front and the rear bolts. So we had to take the seat apart and then put power directly on the seat motors to drive the seats. Definitely would have been quicker to do it with the backwards and forwards buttons.
It already had power.
The main battery in the vehicle is under the passenger seat. There's a fuse box there, that one, that is the main power management.
On the battery?
It only, when you put the key in the car, does it tell that module to send power to the engine bay, but it also needs to send CAN bus messages to say the security's fine. So we can't just trick it and send power. It's going to be power and CAN bus messages required.
One complication with this system is, for example, when there's an obstacle here and the track is conforming to that obstacle, it needs extra length in the track to do that. So we need to have some sort of active track length adjustment. One way of doing that is to move this rear wheel backwards and forwards. An alternative way is to move the front one backwards and forwards. You'd think it'd be easy to move the rear one because in our layout we are driving the front wheel. The reason we're doing this is because of the way the motor fits and the gearbox fits. We end up needing to have the drive at the front. So it'd be ideal if we could just move this part. This doesn't work very well though, because when we're driving this sprocket here, it is applying tension to this belt for this track, which is pulling on this bit of track, which is where the load's applied. So we have tension in this part and this part, which means we see twice that tension, that force, trying to pull this part in. So if this is our sprung part, it would need to be very stiff. So alternatively, if we spring the front assembly, then when we drive this, we get tension in this component, and this part of the track, but the part here is not under tension, so it takes a lot of force to pull all this track through underneath the vehicle. But this part here is just getting fed by the cog here. So this is the bit where the whole reason we're tensioning it is so that this bit doesn't become loose and floppy and fold up underneath. Or more likely what would happen, this would grow in diameter and start slipping on the cog teeth. So to keep that drive engagement, we need to keep this whole belt taut, and we're looking at pushing that cog forwards. This setup with only tension from this component adding to this movement means we have half the force that we would if we were springing the rear wheel.
It's going to be a little bit challenging to test because some of the limp mode doesn't go into limp mode until you start to drive it, but hopefully all those tests are engine tests, and we just want to know if it's happy with the body. So I think just starting it up and getting the error messages, we're just going to work out which error messages are just warnings and which we'll put it into limp mode. Currently the dash isn't working, which is a little bit frustrating because the dash will tell you when the engine's in limp mode, and it will tell you when it's not happy with some subsystem like stability control or ABS. So I think we'll try to fix the dash. They're all dying at this age. The LCD screens just burn out. So we'll try to fix that, and that'll be useful.
This one, we're driving the front of the tracks, which isn't really a problem. The whole tracks move when you drive either front or rear, so it's not an issue. This means we can move this engine backwards and forwards for balance and fit radiators and that sort of thing. We still have this issue here with the knee of the passenger. They may go up and over the transfer case if we're trying to get these seats as low as possible. This differential in the front here is nice because it gets the bonnet line, doesn't affect the bonnet line. That's why we've ruled out putting the engine in the front like the original vehicle. If you see a side profile, you'll know why, because these seats are so low in our layout that you wouldn't be able to see over the top of the engine. This differential here also leaves us another room, more room for later on adding a second differential over the top, which is how we're going to do this, the steering. Sorry, so this is the drive differential. We have a separate differential on top that gives us steering input. This is another solution here where we remove the transfer case from the gearbox. This is what we call a married transfer case and gearbox, where they're one unit. Some older vehicles, the transfer case was an auxiliary item with a little tail shaft between the two, and you could easily disconnect it, and some versions would be sold as a two-wheel drive, and then the four-wheel drive option would add that in. The Touareg was only ever sold as a full-time four-wheel drive. So this box was never designed to run as just a two-wheel drive, but I think it would be achievable. I think I'm pretty confident they don't share oil, or if they do, it's just a little oil passage that we could possibly block off. I'm just not sure of the output bearings here. There's a chance that this shaft's not well supported because it would be supported by the transfer case. So we need to do a little bit more experimenting or a little bit more discovery before we sort of committed to this. The issue is we also lose the high-low gearbox, which I think would be quite beneficial to be able to use that load gearing. So I'm sort of steering away from this before we even go any further.
Our first pass at this, we're going to just try to keep the ignition switch, so you'll just walk up to this thing like you walk up to the Touareg, put the key in and turn it. Putting that key in has NFC. It's a chipped key, so it knows that key is chipped to this computer. So if we do try to keep this loom and try to use the parts we have, we're definitely going to use that. If we end up trying to just keep the computers and spoof it, you probably won't have an NFC security system. We're just searching online and we found in a forum a guy who's stripping a Touareg to make it an off-road vehicle, and to make it reliable and to get rid of all this extra weight, he's stripping everything out, and he's using a module that is a power delivery module, so it's like a fuse box replacement, but it has a feature where it can tell the computer that the body's okay, you're good to go. So it might be a way of spoofing the CAN messages that tell the computer that the key's in the ignition, everything's been checked, and we're right to go. So that's another solution. So this is the cheapest solution because we have all this, but there's a lot of unknowns, and maybe with a bit more research, we can see if this other module just plugs in and does it for us.
This layout is exploring solving the issue of the transfer case by just chopping off the output. We could possibly cut all this off, but we would need to get it to a finish that we can either weld or screw on a plate there, because we need to contain the oil. It would also weaken this housing because it would no longer be a cast hollow sort of tube section. It would be a open section, and if you've ever played with a Weet-Bix box, when you open the lid, you can just twist it and it's a soggy Weet-Bix box. But if you close the lid, it becomes a nice solid cube again. That's the concern, that if we remove this, we do need to replace it with a plate and bolt it in or attach it sufficiently that we have a strong structure again. Yeah, this solves the passenger knee room issue. Yeah, we're leaning towards this possibly. We still have freedom to move this whole engine transmission section backwards and forwards to work out where we want that balance. But once again, we've got room for a second diff here. I don't know, we're leaning towards this. So this is what we have modeled a little bit in 3D. So this is what we were just looking at, but now we can flip to this, and in this angle you can actually see how big that engine is and how nestled in it is. It's also a very large transmission, and you can see why if we put this out the front we'd have visibility issues. Yeah, but this is sort of where it's fitting. You can see the differential is going to allow us to keep that front silhouette down low. We have a rough 3D scan of the body, and you can see that everything's fitting inside that body currently. Yeah, we did joke about the C3PO version where we drop the body down and have the head sticking out the top. But the true to the model is back up in that position there. Top view here, you can see how narrow the cabin is. I think we're going to take a little poetic license and just sort of modify these lines and widen this area up here so that we can fit 2 people in, because I think that would be more fun. That's it.
As long as we can get the ignition powering up, even if it's sending a message saying that it's not happy because a lot of things aren't plugged in, we should be able to start talking to different modules as soon as there's power distributed. So that will be the next step, powering it up and getting the OBD communicating and finding out how much trouble we're in. So.